What if one of the most powerful networks in modern history wasn't built on money or armies, but on symbols, rituals, and silence? For more than 3 centuries, the Freemasons have been accused of secretly shaping governments, revolutions, and even the way the modern world thinks. But behind the conspiracy theories lies a far more complex and far more fascinating reality. #10. Freemasonry was never meant to be secret. One of the biggest misconceptions about the Freemasons is that they are a secret society. In reality, Freemasonry has always described itself as a society with secrets, not a secret society. That distinction matters. From the very beginning, Masonic lodges openly existed, published their locations, and even advertised meeting times in newspapers. In 18th century England and colonial America, joining a lodge was not some shadowy act. It was often a public declaration of one's desire to improve morally, intellectually, and socially. The secrecy of Freemasonry is largely symbolic. Masons are taught not secret knowledge about controlling the world, but secret modes of recognition, handshakes, words, and signs used to identify fellow members. These practices come from medieval stonemason guilds, where skilled workers traveled from town to town and needed a way to prove their qualifications without written certificates. In that context, secrecy was about professional credibility, not power. Over time, however, these private rituals began to attract suspicion. Humans naturally fear what they don't understand, and when outsiders saw influential men gathering behind closed doors, imagination filled the gaps. In the American context especially, this mistrust exploded in the early 19th century during the anti-Masonic movement, one of the first third-party political movements in U.S. history. Newspapers accused Masons of manipulating courts, controlling elections, and protecting their own above the law. None of this was ever proven, but the damage to public perception was permanent. Ironically, Freemasons themselves contributed to this confusion. Masonic teachings emphasize discretion, restraint, and humility. Members are encouraged not to boast about their rank or rituals, which outsiders often interpret as concealment. In modern America, many Masons will openly tell you they are members. They just want to explain the ceremonies in detail, because those rituals are meant to be experienced, not described. So, when people imagine Freemasonry as a hidden hand pulling strings from the shadows, they reprojecting modern conspiracy thinking onto an organization whose secrets were originally little more than symbolic traditions. The mystery survived longer than its original purpose, and that mystery became the fuel for myths that still circulate today. #9. Freemasonry did not start as a global elite club. Another common belief is that Freemasonry was designed from the start as an elite organization for powerful men. In reality, early Freemasonry was surprisingly local, practical, and grounded in working-class traditions. Its roots trace back to medieval stonemasons who built cathedrals, castles, and civic buildings across Europe. These were craftsmen, not kings, men who worked with their hands, followed strict ethical codes, and passed down knowledge through apprenticeship. The transformation began in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, particularly in Britain. As large-scale cathedral building declined, operative stonemasons began admitting non-builders into their lodges. These new members were called accepted masons. They included merchants, philosophers, lawyers, and eventually politicians, people attracted not by stonework, but by the symbolic philosophy that had grown around it. The tools of the trade, the compass, the square, the level, evolved into metaphors for morality, balance, and self-discipline. This shift didn't instantly create a global power network. Early lodges were intensely local. Each lodge operated independently, guided by shared traditions, but not controlled by a central authority. In colonial America, Masonic lodges often functioned like community hubs. Members discussed science, ethics, religion, and politics at a time when open debate was rare. For many American men, Freemasonry offered something revolutionary, a space where social class mattered less than personal character. The idea of Freemasonry as an elite club emerged later, largely because influential figures chose to join, not because the organization selected them. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Paul Revere, these names loom large in American history, and their Masonic membership naturally elevated the fraternity's reputation. But correlation became confusion. People assumed Freemasonry created powerful men, rather than powerful men being drawn to Freemasonry's ideals of order, reason, and fraternity. In modern America, this misconception persists. Movies and novels portray Freemasons as global puppet masters meeting in grand halls to decide the fate of nations. The reality is far more mundane. Most lodges today struggle with declining membership and aging demographics. Meetings focus on charity work, personal development, and maintaining traditions that many younger generations barely recognize. Freemasonry didn't begin as an elite institution, and it never truly became one in the way conspiracy theories suggest. It evolved organically, shaped by historical moments, social needs, and cultural shifts. Its influence came not from centralized control, but from shared values carried by individuals into their own professions and communities. That distinction is crucial because it explains how Freemasonry could be both influential and decentralized at the same time, without ever needing to run the world from behind a curtain. Number 8. Freemasons did not all share the same beliefs or agenda. One of the most persistent myths about Freemasonry is the idea that all Masons think the same way, vote the same way, or follow a single hidden agenda. In reality, Freemasonry has never been ideologically unified. From its earliest days, it functioned as a framework, not a doctrine. Lodges provided structure, rituals, and moral language, but what members believed beyond those basics varied widely depending on time, place, and culture. Freemasonry requires belief in a supreme being, referred to symbolically as the great architect of the universe, but it does not define who or what that being must be. This was revolutionary in earlier centuries. In a world torn apart by religious wars, Freemasonry offered a rare neutral space where Christians of different denominations, and later Jews, Muslims, and others, could sit together without debating theology. In the American colonies, this tolerance made lodges attractive to men who valued reason and pluralism but still wanted a moral foundation. Because of this openness, Freemasons often disagreed strongly with one another outside the lodge. During the American Revolution, some Masons were patriots, others remained loyal to the British Crown. In the Civil War, Masons fought on both sides, sometimes recognizing each other as brothers even while wearing enemy uniforms. The fraternity did not issue political orders or unified strategies. It gave men a moral vocabulary, not marching instructions. This diversity confused outsiders. When influential people across opposing movements shared Masonic membership, observers assumed coordination. But shared membership does not mean shared intent. It's similar to modern professional associations or alumni networks. Two people may have attended the same university and ended up on opposite sides of a political battle. The institution shaped their thinking tools, not their conclusions. In modern America, this misunderstanding continues. Some assume Freemasons lean conservative because of their respect for tradition. Others believe they are secretly progressive because of their emphasis on Enlightenment ideals. Both views miss the point. Freemasonry doesn't tell members what to think. It encourages them to think symbolically, ethically, and independently. That flexibility is exactly why it survived so many cultural shifts. The myth of a unified Masonic agenda exists because people want simple explanations for complex historical outcomes. It is easier to imagine a hidden group pulling strings than to accept that history is shaped by countless individuals interpreting shared values in different ways. Freemasonry provided a language of morality and self-improvement, but how that language was spoken depended entirely on the person using it. Number 7. Freemasonry influenced the American founding, but didn't control it. Few topics generate more speculation than the relationship between Freemasonry and the founding of the United States. It's true that many key figures, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock, Paul Revere, were Freemasons. From this fact alone, countless theories have emerged claiming the American Revolution was a Masonic project from start to finish. The truth is more nuanced and far more interesting. Freemasonry did not design the American Revolution. It did not plan independence in secret lodges or issue commands to overthrow British rule. What it did provide was an environment where revolutionary ideas could be discussed safely, openly, and across social boundaries. In colonial America, political dissent was dangerous. Lodges offered private spaces where men could debate liberty, natural rights, and self-governance without immediate surveillance. Benjamin Franklin's experience illustrates this perfectly. As a Mason, Franklin traveled extensively and interacted with Enlightenment thinkers across Europe. He absorbed ideas about reason, science, and human dignity, ideas that later shaped American political philosophy. But those ideas did not come from Freemasonry itself. The lodges acted as conduits, not creators. They connected people who were already curious, skeptical, and ambitious. Even symbols often cited as proof of Masonic control, like the Eye of Providence on the Great Seal, were not uniquely Masonic inventions. These symbols were part of broader European religious and philosophical traditions long before Freemasonry adopted them. The founders borrowed from many sources: classical Rome, Protestant theology, Enlightenment philosophy, and yes, symbolic traditions familiar to Masons. Influence does not equal ownership. George Washington himself was careful about this distinction. While proudly Masonic, he repeatedly refused to allow Freemasonry to be portrayed as a political force. As president, he avoided attending lodge meetings in office to prevent accusations of favoritism or hidden allegiance. That caution speaks volumes. If Freemasonry truly controlled the new nation, such restraint would have been unnecessary. In the American imagination, Freemasonry became entangled with national identity because it mirrored the country's values: individual merit, self-improvement, equality among brothers, and moral responsibility. The fraternity didn't dictate the direction of the United States, but it did help normalize the idea that men from different backgrounds could meet as equals and govern themselves through shared principles rather than inherited authority. Understanding this distinction matters. Freemasonry didn't to pull the strings of American history. It provided a stage where ideas could be rehearsed. The actors still chose their lines, their roles, and their actions. And that difference separates historical influence from the fantasy of total control. Number 6. Freemasonry has been both persecuted and protected by power. If Freemasonry truly controlled governments from the shadows, it would be difficult to explain why it has repeatedly been banned, suppressed, and violently persecuted throughout history. The reality is that Freemasonry's relationship with power has always been unstable. At times it was tolerated or even admired by rulers. At other times, it was viewed as a dangerous threat, not because of what it did, but because of what it represented. The Catholic Church issued its first formal condemnation of Freemasonry in the 18th century. The issue was not devil worship or political conspiracy, but loyalty. Masonic oaths emphasized brotherhood beyond national or religious lines, which made centralized religious authorities deeply uncomfortable. In a world where allegiance to church and crown defined identity, an organization that encouraged independent moral reasoning appeared subversive. The secrecy of rituals only amplified suspicion. This pattern repeated itself in authoritarian regimes. Fascist Italy under Mussolini banned Freemasonry because independent associations were seen as rivals to state loyalty. Nazi Germany followed the same logic. Freemasons were sent to concentration camps, forced to wear inverted red triangles, and categorized alongside political dissidents. Communist regimes also outlawed Freemasonry, labeling it a bourgeois network incompatible with centralized ideology. These governments did not fear Freemasonry because it controlled them. They feared it because it could not be fully controlled. In the American context, persecution took a different form. After the disappearance of William Morgan in 1826, public outrage sparked a nationwide anti-Masonic movement. Lodges closed by the hundreds. Members resigned. A political party was formed explicitly to oppose Freemasonry. If the fraternity truly wielded hidden power, this kind of backlash would have been impossible. Instead, Freemasonry survived by retreating, reforming, and adapting, not by crushing opposition. At the same time, Freemasonry has also been protected by power in certain eras. Enlightened monarchs and reform-minded leaders sometimes viewed lodges as useful spaces for cultivating educated, disciplined elites. This dual experience, protection in one context, persecution in another, reveals a critical truth. Freemasonry has never been the power behind the throne. It has always existed at the mercy of the political climate. This contradiction dismantles the idea of a single, unstoppable Masonic agenda. An organization that is banned in one country while tolerated in another cannot be orchestrating a unified global plan. What it carries across borders is not control, but a set of adaptable ideas, moral self-discipline, fraternity, and symbolic thinking. Those ideas can thrive under freedom, and they wither under tyranny. Number 5. Masonic symbols are tools for teaching, not codes for domination. Few aspects of Freemasonry attract more speculation than its symbols. The square and compass, the all-seeing eye, the checkered floor, these images are often portrayed as encrypted messages of hidden rule. In reality, Masonic symbols function much more like teaching tools than secret commands. They are visual metaphors designed to be remembered, reflected upon, and applied personally. Most Masonic symbols are borrowed, not invented. The square represents morality, the idea of acting square with others. The compass symbolizes self-restraint, drawing boundaries around one's desires. The level reminds members that all people meet as equals in the lodge, regardless of wealth or status. These ideas were not unique to Freemasonry. They were common moral concepts in European philosophy and religious thought. Freemasonry simply systematized them into a symbolic language. The reason symbols feel powerful is because they bypass pure intellect. Instead of delivering moral lectures, Freemasonry asks members to experience lessons through ritual and imagery. This approach made sense in a time when many people were illiterate. Symbols created shared meaning without requiring books. Even today, humans respond more deeply to stories and images than to abstract rules. That psychological impact is often mistaken for manipulation. In American popular culture, this misunderstanding exploded through movies, novels, and internet theories. When people see Masonic symbols on currency, architecture, or monuments, they assume coordination. But symbols spread because they are compelling, not because they are commanded. The Eye of Providence, for example, appears in Christian art centuries before Freemasonry adopted it. Its presence on the dollar bill reflects broader Enlightenment symbolism, not secret ownership by a lodge. Within Freemasonry itself, symbols are intentionally vague. Members are encouraged to interpret them personally. Masons may see the same symbol and draw entirely different lessons from it. That flexibility would be disastrous for an organization trying to issue precise instructions. Ambiguity empowers reflection, not obedience. The fascination with Masonic symbols says more about human psychology than about Freemasonry. People crave hidden meaning, especially in a complex world. Symbols offer the illusion of a master code, a sense that someone, somewhere, understands the whole picture. Freemasonry uses symbols to encourage individual growth, not global control. The fact that those symbols survived for centuries speaks to their emotional resonance, not to their conspiratorial function. Number for Freemasonry has no single global leader or central command. One of the most dramatic claims about Freemasonry is that it operates like a shadow government with a single leader, a hidden headquarters, and a unified chain of command directing events across the world. This idea collapses the moment you examine how Freemasonry is actually structured. Unlike religious institutions or political parties, Freemasonry has never had a global authority capable of issuing universal orders. Freemasonry is organized around Grand Lodges, and each Grand Lodge is sovereign within its own territory. The Grand Lodge of England does not control the Grand Lodge of New York. The Scottish system does not answer to the French system. In fact, many Grand Lodges do not even recognize each other as legitimate due to differences in rituals, rules, or philosophical interpretations. This fragmentation alone makes the idea of a unified global agenda nearly impossible. In the United States, Freemasonry reflects the country's federal structure. Each state has its own Grand Lodge, operating independently. While they share traditions and maintain friendly relations, no national Masonic authority exists. A Grand Master in Texas has no power over a lodge in California. Decisions about membership, charitable work, and internal rules are made locally. This decentralized structure is the opposite of how real power networks function. This lack of centralization often frustrates conspiracy theorists because it contradicts the image of omnipotent control. But historically, decentralization was a feature, not a flaw. It allowed Freemasonry to adapt to local cultures and survive political upheaval. When one jurisdiction banned lodges, others continued operating independently. There was no head to cut off. Even internationally, attempts to coordinate Freemasonry have been symbolic rather than authoritative. Conferences and gatherings focus on shared heritage, not command. There is no secret council issuing instructions to world leaders. No unified financial system. No enforcement mechanism. Freemasonry spreads through tradition and voluntary participation, not coercion. In American terms, Freemasonry resembles a loose network of civic clubs bound by shared symbolism rather than a centralized institution like the Vatican or a multinational corporation. Influence flows outward through individuals, not downward from authority. This reality doesn't make Freemasonry weaker. It makes it harder to define, harder to control, and harder to fit into conspiracy narratives that depend on hierarchy. Understanding this structure is crucial. Power that cannot command cannot rule. Freemasonry persists not because it governs the world, but because it asks very little of the world beyond allowing men to gather, reflect, and improve themselves within their own communities. Number 3. Freemasonry's real power is social, not political. When Freemasonry does influence society, it does so in subtle, human ways rather than through legislation or force. Its real power lies in shaping how members relate to each other and to their communities. This influence is social, ethical, and cultural, not political domination. Masonic lodges historically functioned as trust networks. In early America, where institutions were weak and distances vast, trust was currency. Knowing a man was a Mason suggested he had pledged to certain moral standards: honesty, charity, self-control, and loyalty to fellow brothers. This trust opened doors, not to secret empires, but to cooperation. Business partnerships formed more easily. Disputes were settled quietly. Communities stabilized around shared values. This social capital explains much of Freemasonry's historical visibility among leaders. Men drawn to leadership roles often seek structured environments that reinforce discipline and moral identity. Freemasonry offered exactly that. It didn't give power. It reinforced character traits that made power more likely. In American cities, Masons frequently became mayors, judges, and civic leaders because they were already embedded in networks of mutual accountability. Importantly, this influence worked both ways. Lodges also acted as restraints. Masonic teachings emphasize humility and ethical behavior, reminding members that status outside the lodge carries no special weight inside it. A wealthy industrialist stood symbolically equal to a school teacher. That leveling effect discouraged overt abuse of power, at least in theory. In the modern era, this social influence has diminished. As institutions professionalized and legal systems strengthened, personal networks mattered less. The internet replaced lodges as spaces for connection. As a result, Freemasonry's cultural footprint shrank. What remains is largely charitable, scholarships, hospitals, disaster relief. These efforts rarely make headlines because they lack mystery, but they represent Freemasonry's practical legacy. The idea that Freemasonry secretly controls governments misunderstands how influence works. Real power is rarely theatrical. It emerges from relationships, norms, and shared expectations. Freemasonry contributed to those foundations during critical periods of American development, but it did so openly, imperfectly, and without the centralized authority required for domination. Freemasonry's story is not one of rulers behind curtains. It is the story of how values spread quietly through social bonds, and how those bonds shaped communities long after the symbols faded into the background. Number to Freemasonry has always been more about self-control than world control. By the time you strip away the myths, the accusations, and the centuries of speculation, one theme keeps resurfacing at the core of Freemasonry: mastery of the self. This idea is far less dramatic than secret governments or hidden rulers, but it explains almost everything about why Freemasonry has endured and why it has been misunderstood for so long. Freemasonry teaches that the most difficult structure to build is not a cathedral or a nation, but a disciplined human character. Its rituals revolve around shaping behavior, not commanding others. The rough ashlar and perfect ashlar are symbols of social hierarchy or political dominance. They represent an unfinished individual striving toward moral refinement. Every lesson points inward, not outward. This inward focus often frustrates critics. People searching for evidence of power expect external results: laws passed, wars started, governments toppled. Freemasonry offers none of that. Instead, it promotes patience, restraint, reflection, and responsibility. In American culture especially, these values quietly aligned with ideas of civic virtue and personal accountability. A Mason was encouraged to become a better neighbor, a fairer businessman, a more thoughtful citizen, not a puppet master. This is why Freemasonry survived eras when raw power shifted violently. Empires collapsed, monarchies fell, ideologies rose and failed. Freemasonry adapted because it did not tie itself to a single political outcome. Its teachings could coexist with monarchy or democracy, capitalism or early socialism, religion or secularism, as long as personal conscience remained intact. Ironically, this flexibility made Freemasonry appear suspicious. Organizations that demand obedience are easy to categorize. Organizations that encourage internal judgment are harder to control and harder to explain. In American history, this ambiguity triggered fear during moments of instability. When people felt powerless, they projected control onto groups that seemed calm, disciplined, and quietly confident. But Freemasonry never promised control over the world. It promised control over one's impulses: anger, greed, arrogance, ignorance. That promise appealed especially to men navigating periods of social change, where old hierarchies were breaking down and new responsibilities emerged. The lodge became a symbolic workshop for character, not a command center for history. Understanding Freemasonry through this lens transforms it from a threat into a mirror. The organization does not rule society. It reflects society's anxieties about power, secrecy, and responsibility. What people fear in Freemasonry is often what they struggle to master in themselves. Number 1. The greatest secret of Freemasonry is that there is no final secret. After centuries of investigation, speculation, exposes, and conspiracy theories, the most uncomfortable truth about Freemasonry is also the simplest. There is no ultimate hidden revelation waiting at the highest level. No final room, no master code, no moment where the curtain lifts and the world suddenly makes sense. This disappoints many people. Humans crave closure. We want mysteries to end with answers, not with reflection. Freemasonry resists that instinct by design. Its rituals do not deliver hidden knowledge about history or power. They deliver questions about morality, purpose, and responsibility. Advancement in Freemasonry does not unlock secrets about controlling others. It deepens awareness of personal limitations. In American storytelling, this concept often gets lost. Popular culture trains audiences to expect twists, villains, and grand revelations. So Freemasonry is rewritten as a shadow empire because that narrative feels satisfying. The reality, a symbolic system meant to guide self-improvement across a lifetime, feels anticlimactic. But longevity rarely comes from spectacle, it comes from usefulness. Freemasonry's secrets are experiential. They matter only to the person undergoing them at the moment they are ready to understand. Explaining them publicly would drain them of meaning, just as explaining a personal moral turning point rarely moves someone who hasn't lived it. That is why Masons protect rituals not to hide power, but to preserve impact. This perspective also explains why Freemasonry no longer dominates cultural conversation. In an era obsessed with speed, visibility, and instant results, a system that values patience, silence, and slow personal growth feels outdated. Yet that same resistance to trends is what allowed Freemasonry to survive revolutions, persecutions, and cultural collapse. In the end, Freemasonry does not promise answers to the world's problems. It asks whether individuals are willing to confront their own. That question has echoed quietly through lodges for more than 300 years, not because it controls history, but because history keeps proving how hard that work really is. If you like this video, don't forget to hit like to support the channel, and share it with anyone who has ever wondered what the Freemasons really are beyond the myths. Subscribe for more deep dives into hidden history, misunderstood groups, and the stories behind the symbols. Join the channel to unlock exclusive content and behind-the-scenes insights you won't find anywhere else. And if you want to directly support our work, tap thanks below. Every contribution helps us keep uncovering the truths most people never stop to question.